Good evening. My name is Luke Davis, and as you can see, my senior project is called Free Market Principles Gone Dark. So there are three sort of themes of investigation I'm going into. The first theme is like, okay, there's this definition of free markets out there, or as Ife pointed to, what are these like underpinnings of a liberal democracy, or these free markets that kind of underpin that? And so that's my first theme of investigation. I want to find a sort of collaborative definition, a core definition of free markets / capitalism. So that's kind of the principles part of Free Market Principles Gone Dark. And then how has the free market been corrupted? So I've had some very surprising findings about like what the definition of free markets is. And from there, I compare it to what our current state, our political economic governance state and corporatocracy that we have in the United States, which I'll explain later. And I find that there's some misalignment there. And so that's the Gone Dark portion. And the third part is, how do we get out of this mess? What are some reforms, some structural reforms to allow us and anyone with a left-leaning view or right-leaning view, or potentially implementing social democratic reforms to making progress? So the first theme is a free market ideal. I go over two treatises of government by John Locke, which is sort of the liberal underpinnings of capitalism, which is taken from Adam Smith, Adam Smith took from John Locke, and created The Wealth of Nations, which is a lot of the undergirdings of free markets and capitalism, sort of the foundation of classical economics. And then Economics of One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt is a sort of Austrian economics guy, the Austrian School of Economics. And then finally, Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. And he basically connects sort of the Chicago School of Economics style of economics with the idea of democracy and pluralism. So kind of what did I find in this first theme? Well, I found a lot. I highlighted a lot in these 4 books, and I created a little over 90 definitions that could be involved in free markets. And if you want to just take 10 seconds here or so to take a picture of that QR code for a little later reference, you can sort of consult my first essay using some sort of weird AI platform that I recommend signing into Google with to speed up access. You can do that. I'll help you with that later. And then the definitions involve so many categories because honestly, I had a lot. I had to categorize it, or else it'd be a super dump. It'd be a super dump of information. We gotta avoid super dumps, like myself in the bathroom. Never mind. Okay. So the second theme is a dark market reality. So here comes this gone dark part, right? So I look at the Citizens United versus FEC Supreme Court case. Democracy for the Few by Michael Parenti, really kind of going into the dirty bits of all the subsidies and corruption that we have in our government and in our sort of economic policies. Winner Take All Politics by Hacker and Pearson, which really kind of goes, so like this whole ball between Winner Take All Politics, Hacker and Pearson, and the fourth book, Origins of the Federal Reserve System with James Livingston, we're kind of moving into sort of the social sphere. How have we allowed this system to perpetuate? And the system that I found from this is a system of sort of corporatocracy, of corruption in our government. So with Citizens United versus FEC, it kind of talks about this idea of we have established a sort of corporate personhood through a system of corporation that from the founding, the founding of sort of classical economics, post-mercantilist in England, created this system where businesses are now identified with this new sort of human-like but not human entity called corporations, and then a flurry of benefits have come into it. And that's kind of what Democracy for the Few and Winner Take All Politics gets into, but The Origin of the Federal Reserve by James Livingston was actually quite surprising. He kind of theorized that from this sort of English historical perspective, and James Livingston is actually a professor of sociology, he basically said that we have created this corporate class so it wasn't necessarily a collusion of interests, but a collusion of unfortunate sort of slamming an identity on the sort of personal business space, like I'm a business, my proprietorship, and unfortunately it led to a lot of corruption and a lot of centralization of monetary policy and economic policy in corporate hands. The third theme, and hopefully the most optimistic theme, breath of relief, hopefully, we'll see in the future. We have non-implementation of any reform. And the non is, well, if you wanted this reform, because I'm leaving it up to you. You're the people, I'm part of the people, but you are way more than me. And so the first book sort of is a theoretical baseline. and Polyarchy, Participation and Opposition by Robert A. Dahl, Direct Democracy, The Politics of Initiative, Referendum, and Recall by Thomas E. Cronin, Politics Industry, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, by Gell and Porter, and Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy by Andrew Yang. So what did I find in here? Well, I'm just going to kind of read from this because this is some pretty good text. Dahl's Polyarchy provides a political theory basis that increased democratic voice, so basically all the factors, electoral and participatory wise, that if you increase democratic voice, it increases the chance that people's policy preferences will be implemented. And so this kind of got me thinking, if we pursue structural reform first, a la getting people's democratic voice increased, we can pursue any type of economic reforms, like Ether was talking about. If you want social democratic reform, you're going to need structural reform first to get there, because there's like 10 billion economic policies that you could implement. But how are you going to implement that? Well, you're going to have to get it over the whole the corrupted political economic governance system that we currently have. So Cronin says, well, the referendum, initiative, and recall, that's pretty useful tools, right? But he wrote that back in 1989, and now in our current state, for those who are familiar with the California initiative system, the cost per signature for petitions, $17, $20 per signature. Unless you have an extremely powerful grassroots movement that somehow is all volunteer and didn't require any donations, you're going to have to fork out a lot to participate in our so-called direct democracy in California. So he's saying that we're going to need some reforms to a direct democracy process. But finally, to the final reforms that we can pursue, Gell and Porter call for Final 5 ranked choice voting and a Congressional Modernization Commission. Yang also called for these reforms, as well as overturning Citizens United, PAC spending limits, democracy dollars, ending gerrymandering, term limits, restoring earmarks for infrastructure, measuring representative success, so track your representatives, see if they're actually representing you, and ending the filibuster and a ban on monopoly. And just to explain Final 5 ranked choice voting, Final 5 ranked choice voting is where there is a nonpartisan primary where the top 5 candidates advance to the general election, and you get to ranked choice vote them, so sort of a preferential system of voting, like people transfer will vote from Australia. And a Congressional Modernization Commission will be the commission to see how we can modernize Congress. And for democracy dollars, the Andrew Yang's idea, basically it's sort of, okay, kind of let's disaggregate the FEC's budget and kind of give it to the people and let people donate to candidates, kind of to crowd out the rest of the money that's just flowing throughout the entire campaign structure that we have. And this is a little summary here. So the first theme defined free markets. The second theme discovered corporate influence on governments and its negative impacts, examining structural reforms for increasing democratic voice and counter corporate control. And then finally, we found those reforms. Thank you very much. Feel free to donate. Questions? Yes, obviously.
Hi, very illuminating presentation.
Thank you.
So I saw that you read Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith.
Yes, indeed.
My understanding of Wealth of Nations is very much rooted in his previous work, Theory of Moral Sentiments, as the underpinnings of a kind of moral and social system that allows his ideas of the free market to work. So I was wondering to what extent to this research have you interacted with that work in your understanding of Adam Smith's free market?
I'll continue to be honest, I have not read the Theory of Moral Sentiments, but there are many, I'll talk about the many surprising aspects of this sort of idea of free markets. One of them was a restriction on the monopoly of resources, and another one was actually a mention of the freedom from extreme want or poverty. I found so many surprising things reading, well, John Locke and all the other 3 books, the 1,200 pages of The Wealth of Nations, and to my surprise, free markets ended up being a little more left than what I thought it was, and how many libertarians frame it as. So to that factor of what is it like? Could you just restate your question just one more time, please?
I was just wondering about how much you interacted with the Theory of Moral Sentiments and your understanding of Adam Smith's free market.
Okay, yes, well, yeah, I have not read that, but to the sort of morality and sort of the personability behind free markets is that I think there's actually a lot of missing structures within free markets that could be grasped, and like you could say, okay, well, if we're going to make a little economic step for America, it's to actually move it into free markets, and then maybe to social democracy, and then maybe to democratic socialism. It's not up to me, it's up to the voters, it's up to the people. I don't care. I do care. Yes.
So one of the cornerstones of free market ideology is this sort of like idea that individuals are rational actors. And I'm wondering how you engage with that idea, because it has some sort of like, there are critiques to be made of it, has some weird consequences about like philanthropy, that being irrational. And I'm wondering if you find the like rational choice theory as sufficient for explaining how we ended up in this place, or sufficient for like normatively sufficient for how we get out of it.
Right. So, and to the structural reform part, and thank you for that question. I took a CMC class, California Politics, and Professor Miller's book kind of talked about, okay, well, can people within a sort of structural reform system implementing policy, which inevitably would result in economic policy, which would affect the sort of rational choice model, or touch on it at least. And they found that, on balance, as I believe one previous presenter mentioned, that there's a sensible mix of policies out there that are advocated by sort of the people who are willing to participate in that direct democracy system. And so I believe the voters are rational, and I believe those who participate are rational, and on balance, the swell of the sort of radical policies that many people think will get through don't actually get through. And that if the people, here's my personal thinking, if the people are wise enough to identify the problem, then they're wise enough to, once they solve the problem, participate in that system. Because you have to be way more intelligent to figure out they're the problem than to participate in a system where the problem does not exist.